Hello, thanks for tuning in to Scottsdale Channel 11 on our cable channel. I'm Virginia Korte. I am a member of your City Council and a longtime business and community leader. Today we're going to have a conversation around transportation and specifically high capacity transit. So we have really segmented this conversation into four aspects, and we're going to talk a little bit about history of Scottsdale and the history of transportation and transit in the entire valley. We're also going to talk about the needs of Scottsdale, our citizens and our tourists. We're going to talk about different technologies of transportation, buses to light rail, what's available out there. And then we're going to complete our conversation with a next steps. What do we do? What do we do here in Scottsdale to advance a conversation around transportation? I'd like to say that this is a conversation for the next generation. And Scottsdale ought to begin the conversation around technologies. What's it going to cost? Where are we going? It seems that historically we haven't been able to get off the dime of, well, we don't want it going down Scottsdale Road. So today with me to have that conversation are three great people. First of all, I'd like to introduce Paul Basha. Paul Basha currently is our transportation director for our City of Scottsdale. I've known Paul longer than we care to talk about. He has been back from 1984 to 2000. He was our traffic engineer. In 2000, he left to join the private practice in consulting as a traffic engineer and was known as one of the top consultants in the private sector for 13 years. He is an accomplished publicist. Shall we say, he's published 5 articles in the Institute of Transportation Engineers Journal. He serves on 3 nationwide transportation committees, and he teaches as a faculty associate at ASU for the last 20 years. So welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Councilman.
Next we have Valerie LeBlanc. Welcome, Valerie. Valerie is principal of Places Consulting Firm, focusing on place-based tourism. It's all about character of place and social capital in placemaking and systems-based strategic planning. Valerie led our 5-year strategic plan for tourism for our City of Scottsdale, and she is currently under contract in implementing that 5-year strategy.
It's been great fun, too.
Yeah. Well, welcome, Valerie. Thank you. And lastly, we have Shannon Scutari. Welcome, Shannon. Currently is president of Scutari & Company and specializing in facilitating public and private partnerships for transportation infrastructure, community development, transit-oriented development, and urban revitalization projects. She has over 20 years of experience in public policy work and transportation worlds. She has worked with 2 Arizona governors. We're not going to say who they are. And also has much public sector experience with the City of Tempe, Arizona Department of Transportation, and other organizations. So welcome. Welcome, Shannon. So with that, we're going to talk a little bit about history, and we like to kind of say that Scottsdale, and I'm going to steal a line from you, Valerie, that Scottsdale began as a one-horse, one-rider town. And wouldn't some of us want to return to that? I know that there are many people that would like to tie their horse up in front of Lutz Pharmacy, and that dates back.
Oh boy.
And so back, 20 years ago, we had the conversation of transportation and future transportation. And so, I kind of like to talk about, well, what happened 20 years ago? And maybe, Shannon, you'd like to start with that.
Sure. So let's go really, I think, even 30 years back.
Okay.
Because in 1985 and really the early 80s, there was a whole lot of conversation about 2 initiatives that would go to the voters, actually referendums, where the legislature referred to the ballot 2 different transportation measures that each of them were to raise the Maricopa County sales tax a half cent. And the first one was to go to the voters in 1985. And it was for primarily freeways. 95 to 97% of the funding for freeways, and then that remaining 3 to 5% for.
And that was called Valtrans at the time.
No, actually, that
Oh.
was called Prop 300.
Okay.
But
Okay.
the other side of that conversation was the Valtrans conversation. Exactly. So it was supposed to be first the 1985 vote, which actually passed Maricopa County wide with the heavy freeway element, a little tiny bit of transit. But then it was really in the late 80s supposed to be a follow-up to that, which was a half cent for transit only. Rail, bus, a true transit connected system throughout the entire region. That did not pass. That did not pass. Actually, it overwhelmingly did not pass.
I remember that.
I bet.
I remember that. Being in the car business, I remember that.
Well, I'm
yes.
sure. And so there was a lot of years after that, all the way up until about 1996, before a city would take on a transit measure. And the city of Tempe was the first city in the region to pass a transit tax in 1996. And the Chamber of Commerce was a huge reason that passed. The Tempe Chamber of Commerce. There was a need at that point for the central city, the city of Phoenix, to have a robust transit initiative. So they went to the voters in 1997, I believe, and that measure did not pass. But it really overwhelmingly passed in 2000. 65% of the city of Phoenix voters in 2000 passed what we call Transit 2000.
That's impressive.
It was
It's very impressive.
unbelievable. Councilwoman Peggy Bilstein, Mayor Skip Remza, again, folks from the business community, Friends of Transit, a lot of support regionally, because the city of Tempe and other cities that wanted a connected transit system needed this to pass in the central city. So it was all transit. No roads were included in that. So then we got a lot of momentum soon after that. I was with the city of Tempe at the time. We had already put in local money to actually have a rail system. We needed funding from the central city, Phoenix, and then another city, the city of Mesa, to join to have truly a connected rail system, because we needed to go to the feds to show them that we could have literally a large local match to a federal match for the light rail system. And so there was a lot of momentum at that time after it passed in Phoenix. And so all of the cities and towns within the Maricopa County region in the early 2000s negotiated the regional transportation plan to go to the voters to basically extend that original 1985 half-cent sales tax that was primarily for roads. It was coming up to sunset in 2005. So all the region came together and put together a plan that was going to go to the voters in 2004, November 2004. And it was agreed upon that the needs were very different in the communities, and that literally 33% of the roughly $17.5 billion that was projected over the 20-year lifespan of the tax extension, 33% would go to rail and transit, which was about really $6.5 billion of the plan. 10% would go to arterials, roadways within the cities, regional connected roadways. And remember, this was all the cities. This was Peoria, this was Chandler, this is Glendale, this is Tempe, this is Scottsdale had its needs. And that 57% of the funding would go to roadways. That overwhelmingly passed in November of 2004. So for the first time in the history of the region, we finally had billions of dollars going for regional transit.
And was that Proposition 400?
And that was Proposition 400.
Okay, okay. Thank you. So, so that was in 2004, 2005. So then I believe there was a conversation among Scottsdalians to, how are we going to use the percentage of this Proposition 400 money?
Correct.
Right? And so what happened
Correct.
there? I was here at the time, but from your perspective, do you remember what happened with that conversation? And
Well, Councilwoman, we use those same funds today. We call it our arterial life cycle program as well as our transit life cycle program. And most of the projects that you see constructed in the city of Scottsdale, either street projects or bus and trolley projects, are funded through that Proposition 400 funding.
so, in spite of the fact that we are not using those funds for high capacity transit, are we still getting our fair share of those funds?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
For both streets and buses.
Okay.
For example, over the next 20 years, we have allocated $240 million to be spent only on street improvements. And it comes mostly out of that Proposition 400 funding. And it's supplemented by the City of Scottsdale 0.2% transportation sales tax.
So, Paul, I know you were not here as a city employee. You were off making more money, I know. But I know you're a Scottsdale resident, I believe.
I have been most
You have
of
been.
the time, yes.
And so very interested in the dynamics and the dialogue going on at that time. And at one point, the Transportation Department and the Transportation Commission were going through a master transportation plan at the time.
Yeah.
Yes,
Correct?
that's correct. That was in the mid-2000s.
In the mid-2000s.
Yes, and I in fact was a sub-consultant traffic engineer to the prime transportation consultant for that project.
Now, I remember, shall we say, a bit of contentious conversation around what would be included in that master transportation plan, and that there were many individuals in our city concerned that if light rail or any type of rail technology was included in that master transportation plan, that would be the fait accompli, and we'd have it going down Scottsdale Road. Is that true?
So I actually want to talk a little bit to that by really giving a lot of credit to folks that negotiated Scottsdale's fair share in the regional transportation plan, because there was a need to have a real regional approach, because the system itself, to be successful, has to truly be regional and connected. And that was really the spirit of how Scottsdale participated, that it got its fair share, but it also was very supportive of having a successful regional system that it could potentially maybe someday tie into. So the contentiousness that I was in the city of Tempe at the time as their government relations director. So we were really concerned with getting our federal funding for the light rail system, because we were Tempe was using its own local sales tax to fund it's 5.5 miles within the city of Tempe for the whole 20 miles. Couldn't use any of the regional sales tax for that. Could only use the regional sales tax for extensions. So I watched during a lot of the conversation, Scottsdale have the opportunity to connect the rail system at some point in time, not in the early 2000s, but
At some future
potentially
point.
at some future point on Rural Road into Scottsdale. And so the decision was that there was a few extra miles in the plan for Tempe to extend either north on Rural Road or south on Rural Road, Chandler. And that's when I think there was a resistance, both from Chandler and from Scottsdale at the time, to connecting into that system on Rural Road. Now I will say the conversation has changed dramatically in the city to the south of Tempe,
Yes,
and they are looking for ways to connect into the system.
very much so.
But that was what I had witnessed in the city of Tempe.
Well, certainly location has always been an issue here in Scottsdale. I remember there was a lot of pressure put on the city council at the time to eliminate any information or research regarding light rail in that master transportation plan. And the city council directed by majority for the consultant to just ignore transportation, high capacity transit at that time, which has really, from my point of view, has put us behind the 8 ball. And I think that's what we'd like more conversation around as we get into this is what are the needs of Scottsdale today, 10 years later, and how can we move this conversation forward in a productive and inclusive manner to, shall we say, better meet the needs of our residents, the next generation. So, with that, some of us feel that today we're at an inflection point, a turning point, and have we ever had a conversation and defined what the needs of our city are, and our citizens and our tourists? And perhaps we could have some conversation around, is there a need? And I think there is, but certainly I've got some experts here to talk about, how it could feed into our tourism industry, which is one of our most important economic bases here in Scottsdale. We certainly need to continue to meet the needs of our visitors. So, Valerie, could you talk some about what the current visitors are looking for, what their needs are? Are there some trends here that we should be looking at?
There are certainly trends. And there are needs specific to Scottsdale and some of the infrastructure problems. But let me step back 1 second to some of the things that I heard, because when I first started working in Scottsdale in 2013, you come in as an out-of-towner, and people want to frame the issues for you, right? And so the first frame I heard was we've got to be really careful about light rail on Scottsdale Road, and we spent a lot of time and energy with trying to get utilities undergrounded there and to have it be a beautiful place. And so that was sort of the first frame that I heard about it. The second was there was a lot of concern around, were we just trying to develop the entertainment district and the nightclubs and that kind of stuff, and is that what the future of tourism, is that what we thought the future of tourism was? And both of those concerns seem to have some valence toward light rail. If we have light rail, we'll get more of that. If we don't have light rail, we won't get more of that. So that was sort of, and all those components are components that people like to go out at night when they're travelers. People like to take light rail, especially with, if you don't mind me saying this, especially with going and having a cocktail at dinner or something like that. And it's a little bit easier to imagine going to the great restaurants downtown if you can take some kind of transportation. I'm sure Uber has super benefited from that kind of point of view. And so, we have to be really aware that in lots of places where visitors come from, they're used to those amenities. They're used to being able to jump on transit of some sort, if it's a streetcar or, a bus system that really works well, or light rail or Uber or those things. They're used to those. So we have to have that available to visitors. And we have to recognize that in Scottsdale, in this region, you have a very expensive rental car system. And it's not the best situation for travelers. It's takes a lot longer to get into a rental car and to get here.
So Valerie, for our viewers, are you talking about the new airport system?
Yes.
And perhaps some of our viewers don't understand the logistics of renting a car at the airport.
I think that's true.
And if you could just quickly go through the hassle it is to rent a car at the airport.
Well,
please.
And
I'm sure you do it every time you come in.
I do. Although they've offered for me to take a cab and and then get a car when I arrive at my hotel, but it never seems like that's, I don't know if it's me, but I get off the plane and I'm ready to go somewhere, and let's go do what we have to do. And so there has not been a time, including I flew in at 1 o'clock in the morning this trip. There has not been a time when it didn't take me 2 hours to get from the time my plane landed to my hotel in Scottsdale. There has not. And am I saying this is the only time that I think I've flown in this late?
That's unacceptable.
It is. It is. It takes, and I live part-time in New Orleans, part-time in Philadelphia, and my home in Philadelphia is about 30 minutes out of downtown north, the airport south. It doesn't take me that long to get to my home, okay? And parking in Philadelphia is not particularly great at the airport, so I mean, you know, this is outrageous, and it's you know, when you're in a highly urbanized environment, it's not a big deal to think, oh, I'm going to have a hassle getting to where I'm going. But when you're selling a resort, luxury, relax experience, you really don't want that experience to extend into the trip in your location. And so we have been talking, and Paul's, of course, been involved in that, and the industry's been involved in that. How do we move toward a better arrival experience, is sort of what we call it. And how do we get people feeling like, wow, I'm getting ready, you know, the stress is melting away. You know, air travel is so stressful for people. We want it to melt away. We want their Scottsdale experience to start, and we want them to get all the benefits that they can. So it's an issue. If you couple that with millennials, and say, okay, well, what about millennials? Well, I mean, a lot of people say, well, we shouldn't even be thinking about millennials. Well, they are next year the largest travel market of everybody traveling, okay? And not just because there are more people.
Are ages of
early
25
20,
to 35?
Right.
18 to
18
34.
to 34, something like that. And they are the largest market by number, but by spending next year. I mean, they've met baby boomers this year. So we can't ignore that population. Pardon?
Good for them.
Good for them.
Consume, no.
And they like quality of life experiences. So they are more frequent travelers. And what makes them come to a destination and choose a destination is, do I get to spend my money on things that make me enjoy the place, or is there a lot of extra expense? And so they'll choose a destination based on, is there transit available or a lower cost than renting a car? Because I'm only going for 5 days this trip. And can I get there easily? Can I make sure I'm spending money on food and spas and hiking and those kind of things instead of on rental cars? The other thing is the rental car fees in Arizona are some of the highest in the country. And so I'm here this trip, I'm spending more on fees than I am on renting the car. And you know, people look at that stuff and they think about those kind of expenditures. People are traveling more often, they'll come here, they'll see it, and they might choose another destination. And we don't want that.
Paul, did you have something to add?
I do, Councilman, thank you. You asked about the arrival experience into Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport and then renting a car and getting to Scottsdale. Approximately a year ago, 3 of us in transportation took a little field trip to the airport and imagined that we were tourists. When you get off your plane and walk to the gate and walk to your baggage claim, there is not a clue that Scottsdale even exists.
That's true.
There's no word Scottsdale anywhere. When you need to rent a vehicle, you have to get on a city bus essentially and ride 20 to 30 minutes west to get to the rental car facility. And then when you get your rental car and you're coming to Scottsdale, then you've got to backtrack that same 20 to 30 minutes plus drive another 20 to 30 minutes before you get into Scottsdale. Hence the 2 hours that Valerie experienced most recently. And it's quite interesting that travel time is the same. If you're coming from the airport to the rental car facility, it's 20 to 30 minutes. If you're coming from the airport to Scottsdale, it's 20 to 30 minutes. And imagine the difference in the environment with that drive. When you're driving from the airport to the rental car facility, you're driving through, let's say, not the prettiest part of the Arizona desert. However, when you drive from the airport to Scottsdale, you drive through Papago Park, you pass the Desert Botanical Gardens, you pass the Phoenix Zoo, Phoenix Municipal Stadium, and you come into Scottsdale, and it's a very, very lovely place. And you see that Scottsdale experience immediately.
Exactly.
And it's our hope that sometime in the future, we will be able to have a rental car facility in Scottsdale and have a trolley that would shuttle passengers from Sky Harbor directly into Scottsdale to rent their vehicle.
That concept, I know, has been bannered around for about 2 years now, and I know it got nested in the implementation plan of the 5-year tourism strategic plan. Is that moving forward? Is it caught in bureaucracies? Is it?
I would say that it took a little while to figure out how to put the components in place. And probably if there are 5 components, 4 have been well thought out. And from what I can understand, one of the members of our task force has been working with Paul more directly on that. As of this spring, you sort of came up with another component that might be able to make that fulfillable. So, you know, any of these transportation things that I've ever worked on are more complex than you can imagine.
Absolutely, they certainly are.
It's surprising that it is that complex, but there's a lot of will to get it done and a lot of need to get it done.
Right.
And fortunately, the tourism industry is fully engaged in wanting to see that happen, and transportation is fully engaged in
Well,
wanting
and I
to see
do
that
want to
happen.
bring up the regional because you mentioned the tourism industry, and the focus really is more so now than in the almost 20 years I've been working in government relations on being a global destination for the entire region instead of competing within the region. So they've moved more that I've seen over the last few years into this idea of connectedness, so that we're an entire region that is a destination to support the entire tourism industry. So I know, although there's challenges obviously with the airport itself, the folks in Phoenix really do want Scottsdale to have a better connection. They've talked quite a bit about a regional transit connection, Peninsula Rail connection, those kinds of things. And those are things I've been hearing, in particular over the last year to 18 months.
Councilman, let me tell you a little bit of a story that just arose in the last month or so. In early September, there's an American Public Works Association conference in downtown Phoenix. Some people are coming from the city of Columbus, Ohio, and they had heard about our very nice bicycle system in Scottsdale. So they contacted both Scottsdale and Tempe, and they want to visit Scottsdale and Tempe when they're here for the conference in downtown Phoenix. The connection from the hotels in Phoenix to Tempe is very easy. It's a light rail trip. Nothing involved at all. So when they asked us if they could visit us in Scottsdale, they said, how do we take transit to Scottsdale? And I said, well, it's going to take you 2 hours. So let me drive my personal car from Scottsdale to your hotel and pick you up, bring you back to Scottsdale, show you our lovely bicycle system, and then drive you back to your hotel. That's 4 personal trips by me, just so that I can entertain visitors from Columbus, Ohio, who want to have an experience in Scottsdale. And that's absurd. It shouldn't be that difficult.
I agree. So we continue to talk about different needs, and I know we're going to go back and forth on the tourism because that's very, very important to Scottsdale. But there are many other needs, and let's just talk about our streets, Paul. You're our traffic guy. What is the capacity of our roadways, since our arterials are the only thing we have in Scottsdale? Is there a concern there as we move forward in the future?
Yes, Councilwoman, there is concern. Generally speaking, our arterial and major collector street system is at about 70% of capacity. And frankly, that's by itself a good number. If it was much lower, we'd be devoting too many of our resources to asphalt and streets. It includes property. Much less than 70% would be inefficient. Much more than 70% would be congestion, citywide congestion, and that would be poor too. So in general terms, it's acceptable, our arterial and collector street system. However, there are locations where our street system is 20% over capacity, and that's congestion. And the biggest example of that is Indian School Road between downtown Scottsdale and the Pima Freeway. Downtown Scottsdale, as you well know, is home to many large employers and large attractors. Honor Health is in downtown Scottsdale. The Galleria Corporate Center is a large employer now. And then also we have Scottsdale Fashion Square, which is a draw from the freeway system into downtown Scottsdale. And then, of course, downtown Scottsdale itself, along the waterfront, is becoming increasingly attractive and increasingly desirable. So there's a strong transportation connection between downtown Scottsdale and the Pima Freeway that's over-congested. And that simply needs to be solved. Streets are expensive. As I mentioned earlier, we have approximately $20 million scheduled to be spent over the next, I said that wrong, sorry. Over the next 20 years, we have approximately $12 million to spend every year for street improvements. That's $250 million in street improvements. And all that buys us is a little more time, and our existing street system can accommodate, we hope, the future traffic. One of the serious problems we have in Scottsdale is travel in Scottsdale has one choice. We only have private cars. That's truly our only realistic, practical choice. And that's just not the way we like to live in the United States, and certainly not in Scottsdale. We want choices. We want choices where we live, choices where we work, choices where we vacation, whether it's a long vacation or a short vacation. We want choices. We want choices in the type of vehicle we want to buy and travel in. We want, as a culture, to have choices in our transportation. Scottsdale doesn't have choices, and we should have choices. Our trolley system is getting better and better every year. Our ridership is increasing. In fact, of our 3 bus and trolley systems in Scottsdale, 2 of those top 3 are trolleys. Those are free to the riders. They serve essentially downtown Scottsdale to the Tempe border and serve quite well. We also have City of Phoenix buses that operate in Scottsdale and Valley Metro buses that operate in Scottsdale. And we are constantly trying to improve our bus and trolley ridership, which essentially is frequency. We're Americans. We're an impatient lot. If we sit at a traffic signal for over 30 seconds, we're unhappy. If we have to wait 20 minutes for a bus, that's obviously much longer than 30 seconds at a signal.
It's not going to happen. People do not wait 20 minutes for a bus in 105 degrees weather. Mm-hmm.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Correct.
Yeah.
Even if they're prone to riding buses. And let me tell you another statistics, if I may. That's kind of my job as an engineer. The Pima Freeway is currently being widened from 4 lanes per direction to 5 lanes per direction. It's a 25% increase in the capacity of that street. In the capacity of that facility, that freeway. When the construction is all done, it's a 10-lane facility. It will still be congested. Be congested. We will spend, it's not Scottsdale money, but nonetheless it's taxpayer money, $100 million to gain a 25% increase in capacity and still be congested. That's $10 million a mile for that improvement.
And I think that conversation is really important when we start getting into technologies. So we compare the price of supporting roadways and the automobile versus supporting other high capacity technologies and what that difference is, because we've got to remind ourselves that yes, we're paying for those roadways. The taxpayers are paying for those roadways.
Correct.
And the maintenance of those roadways.
And the carrying capacity of doing one type of technology versus another, the
Correct.
ability to carry larger amounts of folks
Correct.
along that system. I did want to comment on the choices, because I wanted to kind of connect what Valerie had said with the millennials and the baby boomers. We've already decided in our conversations that us Gen X's get lost in the conversation, unfortunately, but us too, because we're taking care of baby boomers and also the Gen X's. But the one thing that everyone does seem to agree in those large demographic catchment areas really is choices. They agree that they really are choosing to drive themselves, by themselves, less. And they are okay. We're very car-centric here, but even what we're finding throughout the rest of the region is folks are really making the choice to not drive when they have other options.
Certainly.
And that's only going to increase.
So let's talk a little bit about economic development and the issue around transportation. We know that there is a huge influx of the workforce that comes into Scottsdale every day. And I pulled the statistics off of our Scottsdale City Economic Development website called Choose Scottsdale. And those statistics, I was really surprised. Of those numbers, so employees who live outside of Scottsdale, there's 119,000 employees that live outside of Scottsdale. There's another 25 or 26,000 employees that live in Scottsdale. Of those, 82% of our workforce comes into Scottsdale every day, somehow. 82%. And I think you can talk to any urban planner or any economic developer or any traffic engineer to know that if a city is importing 82% of its workforce, that's not sustainable. Because they're primarily getting into Scottsdale by vehicles, by automobiles, because we don't even have a robust bus system.
Correct. We do not.
So we have historically been a net importer of employment. And, you know, I believe that is something that is very important to consider as we move forward in talking about technologies and talking about this conversation of, or for the next generation. And correct me if I'm wrong, everything I've read that today's millennials, and you know, no offense to Gen Xers,
We're used to
or
it.
baby
We're like the middle child.
or baby
Well, the
boomers, yes,
want to live,
okay.
work, and play in the same area.
We do,
Absolutely.
and the millennials are the epitome of wanting to live, work, and play.
Oh, yes.
They want
No hassle.
to be in an area of culture and music and arts. They want the coffee shops. They want the sense of place.
Yes,
They
very much
want
so.
the experience. They don't want the shiny cars. They want the experience.
Exactly, the lifestyle
The
experience.
lifestyle
Absolutely.
experience. And yes, Scottsdale is creating some of that lifestyle experience with many of our housing options that are coming into construction and are already open, and they are creating that sense of place, isolated, so to speak, and within their own little walls. But yet, millennials want that sense of place. They don't want to own a car. The number of driver's licenses that are being issued in the United States is continually dropping because people don't want to own cars.
Right.
So I think it's important as we move forward that we continue the conversation around choices.
And you deserve a lot of credit in Scottsdale for the walkable, bikeable, connected within
The complete streets, yes.
Scottsdale experience.
But we can do better.
And you've got
Absolutely.
that here, but the question, like you just mentioned, Councilwoman, is are you an island that then no one else can really connect to? And that doesn't provide future opportunities for a sense of energy that comes from other places that
That's right.
helps you grow for the next generation.
That's right. So, we rely, our general fund is primarily funded through sales taxes.
Mm-hmm.
And so we rely on individuals to spend their money in Scottsdale. And so it's not only an influx of the workforce to do business here in Scottsdale, but it's also the influx of the shoppers from other parts of the valley to go to the Scottsdale Fashion Square or go to our downtown to spend their money. And that's important to us too. So
I'm glad you raised that question about becoming an island. I think it's instructive to examine other metropolitan areas in the United States.
Yes, so
Oh, that's a great
Georgetown.
Georgetown in
Georgetown is a
Washington,
great
DC.
one. And Valerie, I know you've done some research on Georgetown, or some of you have. If you want to talk a little bit about their experiences the last 25 years or so.
Well, I think my experience in reading their recent plan is that they're distancing themselves from their experience in the past of foregoing their isolation, and they're saying we really need to be connected in DC.
Because they said no to a connection to a high-capacity transit system
25 years ago.
25 years ago. They said we're good.
We're Georgetown.
We're Georgetown, and we're good.
And they had a big
we'll
university.
Stay this
and
way.
they have,
right.
And they had
Everyone
a
will come to us
fabulous,
regardless.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
And what they saw was a decline in their offices, a serious decline in retail, and more recently, I think, a decline in real estate values, because that connection is what drives the relevance of the place.
Absolutely.
And so,
I guess so.
Jinx.
and so it is a beautiful place. Scottsdale is a fabulous place.
Yes.
And one of the things I think about with the millennials is they spend all of their time in this network environment, or a lot of their time in this network environment. And what that means, there's an author you may know, his name is Manuel Castells, came out of Berkeley, wrote a wonderful 3-volume set, Millennial, Identity, and something else. I can't remember the last one. But essentially his thesis is the more time and energy and economics that are involved in the network, the more value place has. And so think about the things that you love about Scottsdale and recognize that this connection is going to make, if you do it right, will make those things that you love more what people are coming for. It'll be more important that you have the arts, the culture, the walkable, bikeable environment, the small lot development in downtown, if you can hold on to that. All those things will gain value in this connectedness.
Yes.
And the connectedness, I want to leap a little bit into some of the research that we're finding is really influential in health and brain activity and preserving really your high capacity brain throughout your entire life. The connectivity between yourself and experiences and other people and that community has been shown. I mean, folks like even Dr. Andrew Weil, who's from the U of A and an internationally known expert on brain functions and brain health. Sure, nutrition's important, physical exercise is important, but one of the most important indicators of brain health as we age is our connectedness to others and our community. And so you can even make the connection. Yes, are there challenges with a transit system that includes an opportunity for diversity and all kinds of folks and experiences? Absolutely. Is that a risk to say, oh, well, then we'll have to, all of the folks that ride the public transportation system will be connecting. Those folks coming from the West Valley, or those folks coming from the East Valley, or those folks coming from Phoenix. But what you gain from taking that risk of connecting with folks that aren't exactly like you is you gain that opportunity to really maintain and improve brain function fully into your later years.
That's really interesting. And that leads into some of the startling demographics of Scottsdale, and I believe Valerie, you provided a chart that we're gonna put up on the screen here. But it's about aging. So everyone's talking about aging in place, and you hear that in the social services sector all across the valley. Well, Scottsdale has an alarming percent of elderly, and that population seems to be growing. Right, Valerie?
Well, yeah, and it's very interesting when you look at it against the valley. You can see why some of the other places might have had a different take on how the world was, because if the people that you're around are more like you have your own sense of what the world needs to be. And if you look at the chart, you'll see the big differences between the rest of the valley and Scottsdale, and this aging in place or quality of life. To the end. I read a book when I turned 50, which was only minutes ago. When I turned 50, and it was live like you're 50 till you're 80, and all of those issues.
I mean, all of ours.
Who doesn't want to do that, right?
Right.
Well,
Absolutely.
these are the components that make that possible. The more you're isolated in your home because you don't have transportation capabilities and those kind of things, your sense of decline of quality of life is tremendous. And everybody that I've met in Scottsdale really gets quality of life. They really understand.
That's why we're here, absolutely.
It's true.
So
I take this a little personal too, because I want to be able to stay here and have that experience for the long term throughout my life, and I want a sense of connectedness. So a lot of this work throughout the valley for me has been to have that, so I can stay here and have that experience. But it's also so my children,
right,
who are almost 15, almost 14, and 6, have a place that they actually want to come and live in after they go off to college, or wherever they go off to, or somewhere in state or whatever. And that's the other challenge too, is that are we keeping the talent that we're raising in?
We're not. So
Scottsdale.
I was in a conversation with several friends with sons and daughters in junior, senior level of high school. And all of them were going out of state to school. And talking to them, or do you see you coming back to Arizona? I said, no, Arizona doesn't offer me the type of jobs that I'm looking for, that I can thrive. Yes, I can have a job in Arizona, but can I thrive, and can my career thrive in Arizona? And there's a perception that it can't. And so back to economic development and and how transportation plays a role in economic development and attracting those high-paying jobs. I think it's critical for a community like Scottsdale to talk about and understand the importance of a robust transportation system to economic development and attracting the high-paying jobs in the financial sector, in the technology sector, in the health sector, so that we can sustain Scottsdale as the most livable city, and and sustain our quality of life.
Right, because the jobs follow the talent. So if the talent leaves because they don't have all these transportation choices that they want, then
one of our
jobs don't come.
transportation commissioners was born and raised in Scottsdale, attended Arizona State University for his bachelor's, and then went to one of the schools in Boston for his master's degree. And talking with his fellow students, he tried to extol the virtues of living in Scottsdale. And for him, it was an easy conversation.
Sure.
None of his friends joined him in returning to Scottsdale. They all went to other parts of the country, and a large part of the reason was because of the relatively poor transportation system in metropolitan Phoenix. They simply did not want to own a car. They did not want to live in a community where they were forced to own a car. They wanted to live in a part of the country where they had choices, where they had transportation choices.
Yes. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for that. Anything else on needs? We've talked about business needs. We've talked about attracting businesses. We've talked about tourism.
I want to say
aging in
one more
place.
thing about tourism, which is I think that we in tourism, it's funny because everything's fractal, right? So if you run a hotel in Scottsdale, your competitor might be the hotel across the street, right? If you have a destination in the valley, your competitor might be another destination in the valley. And so far, nobody's quite there for Scottsdale, right? Scottsdale still has the lion's share of what people come to this region for. But there's an interesting brochure that's gotten a lot of traction recently. And it is a brochure that connects up the rail system and arts and culture. And so if you want an arts and cultural destination, you don't have to come to Scottsdale. You can get on light rail and run through all the assets that are along light rail. And they've put out a brochure about this.
Oh,
okay?
yes, connect downtown with Tempe and the Desert Botanical Garden, and go on to
Right.
The Arts Center in
It's an arts
Tempe,
center. Oh, it's in Tempe,
and then and then on to Wow!
So they're
Yes.
leveraging the assets that everybody's built
And Scottsdale's absent.
and Scottsdale's absence, right?
And yet we pride ourselves as being the center for arts and culture.
Right.
Well, and then there's a really telling other piece of that, and that is recently I was listening to the post-Super Bowl report from the woman who ran the Super. I can't remember her name.
Jay Perry. I was going to mention the Super Bowl when you said we miss out because.
Well, Scottsdale did what they could
Yeah.
in putting together the big fashion square event and things like that. But
Right.
the NFL and now the follow-on college championships,
They're going
National
elsewhere.
championships.
both of them want to say we really like the light rail and the flexibility that gives us for attracting people to our events, and that's more the
right.
model going forward.
And the high, the folks that the premier events for those things are the ESPN tents, the media tents, things like that. So folks want to still experience Scottsdale, but the events and the media activities and the free concerts, they're all in downtown or downtown Phoenix.
So we have all those components that are going to pull away from what this city has been so successful in developing. I'm not saying tomorrow it's going to make a difference, but I'm saying we need to think about tomorrow.
Okay, so we need to move along, going to the next section and talk about technologies and technologies. What is out there in fixed rail? How long does it take? What does it cost? Why do millennials like rail and wouldn't think of getting on a bus? And how does all that complete streets? So, maybe if we can package this up in a short conversation. Okay, Paul, can I call on you on that?
Sure, I've got a few comments. I also have some more comments about needs if we have time to get back to that. But light rail is the preferred transportation choice for millennials. And in our community, there's a great deal of fear about what light rail might bring. We're trying to understand the strong attraction to rail systems by people under 40. And we don't have answers yet, but we have some clues. Part of it is not having to own a vehicle. That's certainly true. But you could do that with a bus system, so why a rail over bus? Travel time is a huge component of that. Light rail stops infrequently, whereas buses stop every 700 feet. Light rail is more comfortable. The seats are more comfortable. Because you're traveling longer distances, you're in those seats for a longer time, and so the quality of the ride matters. We're trying to address both of those in Scottsdale without having to use rail. We're contemplating operating more express buses, and we're one that we're contemplating in our new transportation master plan that's in process now would be an express bus from the Scottsdale Air Park to Scottsdale Fashion Square. Only 2 stops. It would stop at the Air Park, at the Park and Ride, at Scottsdale and Thunderbird, and then at Fashion Square. So it would be a very quick travel time. We would like to have a vehicle that's a little nicer than a typical bus and very comfortable seating, and certainly one where people could access their smartphones or a wireless connection with their computer. When it comes to seats and aesthetics of the vehicles, we are focusing on trolleys because the trolleys are completely within Scottsdale, completely within our transportation department's control. It's mostly funded by the federal government and the regional entity, the Proposition 400 regional funds that Shannon discussed earlier. But with those trolleys, approximately half of our trolleys are what we call a vintage look. It's not wood,
Fit
but
into our sense of place here.
exactly. It's not wood, but it looks like wood. It's got that San Francisco cable car feel to it. We did hear that the seats, the fake wood, were not as comfortable. So we are going to remodel some of our existing buses into this vintage trolley look, and we're not going to use wooden seats. We're going to use much more comfortable seats. And as you may recall, Councilman Korte, you authorized that at a council meeting in June
Oh, yes.
for that expenditure. and when that refurbishment is complete, all of the trolleys in Scottsdale will have that vintage trolley look. So that's certainly part of it. There's an air quality issue that seems to be important to people under 40, and it should be important to everybody. And electric operated vehicles have less at the source pollution than diesel or gasoline powered vehicles. We are exploring the possibilities of electric buses that don't require wires. It's especially possible for our trolley routes. If the trolleys can operate 100 miles per day or less, then there are these vehicles that can charge overnight and they can travel 100 miles without another charge, without any other electrical current. There's also some battery powered buses that are being contemplated. So we think that will be part of the solution to attracting people to the buses instead of the rail. I'll also say this, there's a lot of fear about rail, about the disruption it makes to a community, and we'll be showing you some photographs soon in this broadcast of Scottsdale Road between McDowell Road and Thomas Road, and the photographs are not very pretty. There's a large number of vacant properties, there's a large number of underutilized properties. I challenge anybody to take these photographs that you'll see on the screen soon and show them to your friends in Chicago and Minnesota and North Dakota and tell them to come visit Scottsdale and visit this lovely place. I'm not sure what we're trying to protect when we say we want to protect the businesses along Scottsdale Road from light rail. And next, you'll be seeing some photographs of the city of Phoenix, Central Avenue, adjacent to light rail. You'll see vibrancy, you'll see activity, you'll see a large number of restaurants, many of which are new that have been created because of light rail. You'll see patio seating adjacent to the light rail lines, which is very attractive.
Most all locally owned businesses.
Most all locally owned businesses,
Yeah.
excellent point.
Yeah.
One is Switch, another is Fez, locally owned restaurants. Also, Durant's is right on the light rail line. Durant's has been here, as best I can tell, for half a century, and it survived quite well through the light rail construction and is still very, very functional. You'll also see a wide variety of businesses that are along the light rail line on Central Avenue in Phoenix, thriving, doing very, very well. Additionally, you'll see very attractive landscaping with flowers and trees and bushes. In some of the photographs that you'll see on this broadcast, it's hard to locate the light rail line because of all the vegetation, because of the landscaping. You'll also see some artwork that is included in some of the light rail stations, as well as just adjacent to the light rail track. That attractiveness of the environment surrounding light rail is another reason why people are drawn to light rail as opposed to buses. And when I say people, I mean millennials, people under 40, as well as businesses.
And Paul, I think you bring up important points. 10 years ago, Scottsdale was mired in rhetoric, and light rail is ugly, and the ugly wires, and it's unattractive, and it's disruptive, and it puts businesses out of business. Yes, there has been some fallout on some businesses. I used to go to Jordan's on Central Avenue, Jordan's Mexican food, as you know, when I was 12 years old, and it was a from 12 to 50, and it was a great place, but it didn't survive. So is that due to the light rail, or is that due to something else? I don't know. But you bring up the point is that light rail is attractive, and if we can get in the city of Scottsdale and conversations, if we can get past the rhetoric of 10 years ago, I think we can move this conversation forward.
Councilperson, in the conversations that I had lots and lots of conversations as an outsider, where people are talking to me about what's important about Scottsdale. If you do make the decision to go with light rail in Scottsdale, it will be beautiful.
Yes.
I'm very confident of that, because that's what the people here understand as one of their quality of life standards. And
So we talked about along light rail, Central Avenue is a great example of a refurbished a refurbished area which is alive and well, and businesses that are thriving. And here on Scottsdale Road, we're wondering what we're protecting, because I know exactly what you're talking about, Paul, because I've kind of lived down there for many, many years as a business person, and watched, I witnessed the rise and fall of that whole area, and the decline has been continuous since about 1992. So where was I going with this? So how would we consider connecting? You know, we've talked about connection to other parts of the valley as important not only for health, but for businesses and workforce and business attraction. How do we connect? Should we say light rail is it because we could connect cleanly and that transition would be clean? Or are there other technologies of fixed rail that would be attractive, that would perhaps be a better fit for Scottsdale?
Right, and we call these things in transportation 20-year overnight success stories.
20-year, say that again, Shan.
20-year overnight success stories.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, folks only remember when you cut the ribbon. They don't realize that for at least 20 years in large infrastructure projects, that the work and the vision and the planning and the financial apparatus for all of it started 20 or 30 years prior to actually cutting the ribbon on a large infrastructure project. And transportation, most of these are large infrastructure projects. And so even if you just started that conversation now about what works to revitalize some of these areas through connectivity, it's unbelievable the types of technologies, the wireless technologies. City of Tempe's looking at wireless technologies right now for a modern streetcar to not disrupt their Mill Avenue experience. And so in the life of that modern streetcar over the next 5 years or so before that's actually operational, there could be some hydrogen opportunities for a technology that's wireless along Mill Avenue. So you really don't even know now what the 20-year overnight success story will look like for connectivity for Scottsdale. But what we do know from other experiences throughout the country and really the world is that deciding not to connect, we do know what that story ends like.
And it's the Georgetown story.
Right, and it doesn't end in a robust, relevant community in 20 or 30 years.
In 20 or 30 years, there is belief that a community the size of Scottsdale without a robust transportation system is not sustainable.
Correct.
Yeah. So
correct.
let's go to then, if we made a decision today, it's 20 to 35 years. However, within the funding mechanism of the MAG system, right, the transportation countywide, would there be funding for Scottsdale in the current system, Paul?
Yes, there would be if the Proposition 400 sales tax is renewed by the voters. It's set to expire, help me Shannon, in 2020, I believe?
2025.
2025.
Mm-hmm. It's a 20-year cycle starting in 1985. So
Okay.
yeah.
So correct me if I'm wrong, the next 10 years, the funds accumulated through that sales tax have already been allocated to other projects.
Yes, and many of those projects are in Scottsdale. As I mentioned, the street system, approximately $12 million a year for the next 20 years. We also have approximately $6 million per year for the next 20 years in our bus and trolley system. We would need more money if we wanted to have something more robust. And that's an important point, Councilman Korte. We're pretty much done building new freeways. All the good spots for freeways are taken in the
Yes.
Phoenix metropolitan area, with one exception, and that's the South Mountain Freeway, which is another 20-year process that's coming to a conclusion, perhaps. There's still serious debate about whether that freeway will be constructed or not. That's the last one. We're not going to be able to build any more freeways. As I mentioned earlier, the freeway widening we're experiencing now on State Route 101 is $100 million to simply add one lane in each direction. We don't have the money to build new freeways. We don't have the money to widen existing freeways. It's simply not going to exist. The funding source for freeways, in part, is gasoline tax. The state gasoline tax in Arizona is approximately $18. 18 cents. Thank you. 18
Feels
cents.
like $18.
Doesn't it? 18 cents a gallon. And then the federal government gasoline tax is also 18 cents a gallon. Those rates were initiated in the early 1990s. Yeah. There's no movement
25 years, no.
No movement to increase that tax. No. So we're not going to have the revenue for freeways. And as Shannon alluded to earlier, once you've built a rail system, you're all done. You can increase capacity by just adding another car.
Right.
There's no construction disruption any longer.
Right.
There's no losing business anymore. It's just adding another vehicle.
Adding frequency.
Adding frequency. You can make the trains longer, you can make the trains operate much more frequently. And it's exactly what was accomplished with the Super Bowl when it was here, just added freeway cars. We couldn't run out and build another lane of street on Scottsdale Road just for the Super Bowl, but we could just add another car to the light rail and increase its frequency. It's done for the Diamondbacks baseball games, it's done for ASU football games, and soon when I leave my home on the edge of Scottsdale to go see an event at the Mesa Arts Center, I'll be taking light rail. That's what I'll be doing.
That's right. Anything more on technology? Should we move to next steps then? What would the next, Paul?
You're fine, please.
Okay. So we know that the Transportation Master Plan from 2008,
Correct.
right? In 2008, we're updating that. Can you
Correct.
just give us a short synopsis of what that looks like and where the Transportation Commission has been a part of that?
Absolutely. The process is entirely before the Transportation Commission. We began in March. We're hoping the Commission will develop a draft recommendation to the City Council late this year, perhaps November or December. We're hoping it will go before the City Council in next spring, perhaps February or March. There are 4 different elements to the Transportation Master Plan. One is streets, one is bicycles, one is pedestrians, and the last is transit. The streets element, we have a number of relatively controversial ideas that have been expressed. One is to narrow Scottsdale Road downtown from 2 lanes per direction to 1 lane per direction.
And that would accomplish what, a better pedestrian experience?
Exactly, a better pedestrian experience.
And safer.
And much safer. Currently, pedestrians are crossing a 4-lane street at a wide variety of locations. Typically, they're tourists. They like the restaurant they ate at yesterday on one side of the street, want to eat at the restaurant on the other side of the street the next day, and they just walk across the street, trying their best to miss cars. It'd be easier if that roadway was narrowed.
And more attractive to do that.
And more attractive as well. We also would envision angle parking along Scottsdale Road. That would make it easier for tourists in particular to find the location they want to visit and be there. We'd also include bicycle lanes along that section, should that come to pass. It's just a concept at this time.
Mm-hmm.
There has been some concern that the entire purpose for narrowing Scottsdale from 2 lanes to 1 lane is a hidden conspiracy agenda to force light rail into downtown Scottsdale. That's simply not true. Personally, as a transportation professional who's spent the last 30 years of my life in Scottsdale in one part or another, light rail should not be in downtown Scottsdale. It should not. It should be close to downtown Scottsdale, but not in downtown Scottsdale. That's not our character. Other aspects of the streets element, we're contemplating widening Chaparral Road from 1 lane per direction to 2 lanes per direction, and that's a short 2-block section from 78th Street to Miller Road. That will certainly be very, very controversial. It may not be able to happen, but we at least believe it should be discussed. The other streets elements are a little more esoteric, more difficult to describe. Let me focus on the transit element. We are requesting consideration of a number of bus and trolley improvements. There's a groundswell of support for trolleys in the northern part of our city that would serve the Shea Corridor, Honor Health at the Scottsdale Shea intersection, Pima Shea area, as well as the Via Linda Senior Center and the various offices and commercial businesses in the Frank Lloyd Wright, Thompson Peak Parkway area. So we're contemplating trolley routes in that area, as well as more extensive trolley coverage in the Scottsdale Air Park area. We're also discussing increased bus frequency on all of our systems.
That's great news.
And I would also say, I mentioned the $10 million a mile for the Pima Freeway. We doubled our bus frequency last October in the southern part of the city. The cost was $64,000 per mile. We doubled the capacity.
It serves a lot more people.
And it serves a lot more people.
So we know the Transportation Commission is overseeing this update, and they meet once a month. When do they meet?
Councilmember Korte, they typically meet once a month. Through this process, this Transportation Master Plan process, we're meeting twice a month.
Oh, wow.
And we often have specific topics
Okay.
specifically related to the Transportation Master Plan.
And they meet in the Kiva.
They meet in the Kiva.
Is it televised?
It is televised.
Okay.
They're all televised. Let me tell you one more point about the Transportation Commission and their involvement in the Transportation Master Plan. We, as a Transportation Department, had no interest in including light rail discussion. We had no intention of including it in the Transportation Master Plan. Well, the 7 members of the Transportation Commission had a different idea. They voted unanimously to direct us to include at least some conversation of light rail transit. So the next time the transit element appears before the Transportation Commission, there will be one slide showing possible rail corridors in the city of Scottsdale.
And that's healthy citizen input, isn't it?
Healthy citizen input. And I will state very clearly, none of those include downtown Scottsdale. None of those
Okay.
five, there are 5 possibilities, include downtown Scottsdale.
So when are you going to be presenting this to council for adoption
We're hoping next spring, February or March
of 2016?
of 2016, correct.
Okay. Okay.
One other critical aspect for citizen involvement that you mentioned, Holly Water from our Communication and Public Information Office has prepared what we're calling an electronic public forum. So there's a variety of internet sources for providing input, providing opinions and suggestions to the Transportation Department and the Transportation Commission.
And are we going to get those links up on the screen for our viewers?
Yes, those links will be provided on the screen.
On the screen. And also, there was a special Twitter hashtag, and I'm sorry I didn't write it down, but we were developing that. Did that get developed, or?
Yes, it did, and it will be included.
Oh, okay, so a special Twitter account for that.
Wow, look at you. That's
Oh, it's not me. It's Holly
It's-
Walter.
Good
She's
job, Holly.
fantastic.
Holly is great. So anything else? So as we bring closure to this conversation, which I think has been a great conversation, so thank you very much.
Thanks for inviting us.
Anything,
Thank
anything more? Maybe any other next steps? Maybe continuing this conversation in a, maybe we go into some greater detail in some other arena. I don't know. I'm just asking.
Well, I think a lot of these conversations can be very organic on what the citizenry, what all the citizenry, not some of the maybe more vocal minority citizenry really want. And so I really applaud you for this program because it really takes leadership to have a conversation like this and then have subsequent televised conversations based on the feedback from folks that you get on this program. So I really thank you. I'm a Scottsdale citizen, and I really thank you for your leadership on this,
Thank you, Shannon.
because this conversation, I think, is just starting, and the past is the past, and the future will become what you and other Scottsdale leaders help us to become.
Thank you. Well, I would like to thank Valerie and Paul and Shannon for joining me today in a very important conversation. It really is about a conversation for the next generation, and thank you, viewers, for tuning in and caring enough about our community called Scottsdale and the future of Scottsdale. So thank you.